How's everyone doing? Everyone have a good DefCamp? This has been amazing. This has been extremely amazing. All right, you guys ready to talk about this thing? Yeah, a couple of you? All right, that's good. Okay, so a little bit about me. I wear this thing around. It's been getting kind of crazy lately, as you could see from the internet. I pretend to be a hacker on the internet, so that's fun. I can program. I pretend to be able to know how to program, actually. I don't really program. I mostly Stack Overflow. But I do have a bachelor's in computer science. I'm from the United States, from Utah. And so just real quick about this picture that's on the screen that's pretty cool is this was an artist at CNET who put that together, and it was inspired by me. And it was kind of crazy to be in a situation where artists at a news organization are making things that depict me. So it's crazy. So first off, I always like to start with just a huge thank you, because this is not just me who did this project. This is a community effort, and so many people made it possible. This is a sponsored project. I'll get into that a little bit more. So a huge thank you to the folks at Hack5. Huge thanks to DefCamp. I couldn't believe that I was reached out and invited to come speak here. I've never been to Europe, let alone to Romania. This is my first time this far east, and it's been an incredible experience. Like, you guys have been awesome. Everyone's been so helpful. I couldn't bring a battery on the plane. I mean, maybe I could have. Challenge accepted, maybe for next time. But being my first time, I was a little nervous. But staff here got me a battery. They got me a charger. One of the guys hooked me up with a laptop. It's been awesome. Yeah, thank you. You guys have been fantastic. So thank you, Romania. You guys are amazing. A couple other folks to thank really quick. There's some Blackhat staff, because I went to Blackhat with this as well. DefCon, obviously, I was there if you hadn't seen that. There was a lot of staff that helped me move around there and make it easy for me. There's a couple people, RenderMan, who did some previous, he's one of the prophets of the Church of Wi-Fi, so you should check out the Church of Wi-Fi and consider joining. I would encourage it. And then Luxor Security, I'll get into that in a little bit, why they're on my list. And of course, my friend Austin and my friend Brian and my friend Henry, who helped me physically create this thing. It wouldn't have been possible without them. Okay, so why do we want to monitor Wi-Fi? What's the point, right? It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Everybody's using it. Do we know what the implications are of that? Do we know that it's secure? People all the time make assumptions about the security of it. They think that, oh, hey, I can connect to this open wireless network. The provider's not going to do anything on it. They're not going to monitor my traffic. It's cool. Should we? Should we be blindly trusting the people who give us our service? Even in encrypted networks, can we trust them? Who's behind it? Who's creating the network, and who's looking at the traffic? Another thing to monitor Wi-Fi is to check out the risks. What are the risks? There's been some huge ones in the news lately. You got BroadPwned, Blueborn, the brand new vulnerability that came out the other day that's please stop naming vulnerabilities vulnerability. I don't know if you've heard of that one. That one was pretty funny. Yeah, so there's a lot of things on here, and I'm a naturally curious person, and so it was really all these things kind of just came in line with me, and that's really why I built this project. Okay, so let me give you a little backstory, a little history of how this all came about. So at DefCon 23, I had this idea. It was about a few weeks before the conference. What would happen if I took a BeagleBone Black, which is kind of like a Raspberry Pi, slapped 2 radios to it, put it in this little container, put it in my backpack, and walk around and see what happens? Well, at that time, DefCon 23 had about 15,000 people attend it. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of devices. And I wasn't sure what would happen. Well, what happened is I saw a ton of interesting attacks. I saw a ton of interesting data, but I didn't see everything. I didn't see there was a lot of things I missed because it was only a device in my backpack that would last for approximately 12 hours. So the other thing, too, is I was kind of a noob. I didn't really understand a lot of this wireless stuff. I was just testing things out and trying it, which is the best way to learn, in my opinion. And so I was using the Aircrack NG framework, which I'll get into that in a little bit more. But this ultimately inspired me to do more. So that brought on, for DefCon 24, a project that I dubbed Project Lana. So this was a sponsored project by a company called Intel. They have this product called the Minnow board that they hooked me up with some of these devices, and I was able to create 12 boxes that was based on my original design. So I took those 12 devices and deployed them, 3 of them at Blackhat, and 12 of them throughout the conference at DefCon. And so I was able to do distributed wireless monitoring with all of these nodes. So when I did this, I had solved the problem from the year before. I had static points that I was able to monitor from, and I had, basically I was capturing all this data, and they were plugged into AC power, so I was getting lots of data. But there was a lot of lessons learned in this. One of them was that I wanted to use a software called Kismet instead of Aircrack. And the reason is because Aircrack is used primarily for cracking passwords, WPA, WEP, and it doesn't capture full frame. It doesn't do full frame analysis. That's when I found out about Kismet, and Kismet does. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So in addition to that, I also did a talk about my findings about the data at a conference called SaintCon. It's in a security conference in Utah, and that's online somewhere. I'm sure you could find it if you're interested in finding more about that project. So let me give you a little bit more background about how the cactus came about. So I wanted to do something bigger than my 12 boxes. Here's the thing about the 12 boxes. When you do distributed wireless monitoring nodes, nobody really knows you're doing anything. They're just sitting under tables. I was hiding them underneath stages, and I was putting them throughout the conference. People didn't know they were there. It's not really interesting. So I'm like, I got to do something better. So there's a conference called ShmooCon in Washington, D.C., and this guy named Grifter, I don't know if you guys know Grifter or heard about the Trevor situation. Anybody know about Trevor? Raise of hands, couple. Wow. Well, I would enlighten you, but I'm limited on time. But I would look into Trevor the Roach. Look into Trevor the Roach. It'll definitely make you laugh. Anyway, so this guy named Grifter, he tells me to go to ShmooCon, and I'm glad I did, because there I was able to meet up with Darren Kitchen, who is the founder of Hack5. And I got a situation where I was able to talk to him. That's the best part about conferences, being able to talk to people. You get to go find people that you normally wouldn't have a time to sit down with. And he's the owner of this company, and I've loved their products forever. And he says, what would you like to do in the future with your wireless monitoring projects? And I'm like, I want to monitor more. I want to monitor all the frequencies at the same time. He's like, what would you need to do that? I'm like, I don't know, 20 or 30 radios. And he's like, okay, I think we can take care of that. So basically what happened is this. He sent me boxes of Tetras. I ended up with 40 in all to my house. And so this is a sponsored project, #sponsored, and I'm hugely grateful to them. So I want to plug their website, but however, somebody told me that in Romania, they don't ship here. So I'm going to see if I can get that changed so we can get you guys some Wi-Fi pineapples here. So anyways, I'll follow up on that and find out about that. But if you can, support Hackshop. So how did this project really get started? It started with this. So after I got those pineapple Tetras, it was like, oh crap, now I actually have to build this project. I actually have to do it. So the first step is proof of concept, right? So I took 6 of them, hooked them up to my laptop and a battery, and it worked. It literally worked. I was like, oh, wow, if I can do this, I can scale it to, let's say, 10, whatever, or 25 maybe. So what happened in the build? So what we've got is 25 of these Wi-Fi pineapple Tetras. Comes down to 50 total radios and 100 antennas, which is crazy. I would really like to consolidate all those. We've got 2 Cisco switches at the top. The reason why I chose those over anything else, they're only 10100 switches, it's because of their size, and also they supported 12-volt voltage. This whole system runs on 12 volts. And then I've got an Intel NUC at the top, and that thing's got a 250 gig solid state, 16 gigs of RAM, and so we can, or excuse me, 512 gig solid state. And so I can store all the data there and do processing as well, because it's the i5. They're pretty monstrous little boxes. Down at the bottom, I've got the 500 watt power supply, AC to DC power supply, so that way we can plug it in here, and so I don't have to always have it hooked up to a battery. Arduino Micro is what's controlling the lights. And then, as you can tell from the box hanging off of the bottom, there's got to be something with that. Well, it's actually a lead-acid battery, and luckily, you know, I got hooked up and was delivered a lead-acid battery here, so I was able to go mobile, which is crazy. Normally, you'd be like, hey, why don't you use lithium? Well, it's expensive, and you can just drive. A few days before a conference, you can drive to an auto parts store and get a lead-acid battery. So here's some pictures of kind of how the build process went. So everything's custom. You can't really buy anything to put something like this together. So we used plastic, machinable plastic for the rails, and then it's aluminum that encases both of the pieces. And the other thing that's hard when you have this type of a setup is cable management. After I got all this stuff plugged in and hooked in, it was like, oh, it was a nightmare. So luckily, I was able to get some of that a little under control. Don't look too close. That's why there's lights, to make so you don't look too close. And then the frame. So we've got the main part that houses the tetras together, but then it was the frame. So I was at a hunting store, and I saw this open frame. Apparently you use it to pack meat on or build your own stuff out of. And I saw it, and I was like, it was meant to be. It's meant to be for this project. So immediately I purchased that. And me and my friend Brian, we stayed up all night, probably really pissed off the neighbors out in front of my garage, and cutting aluminum and cutting metal and drilling and all of that. So, but got it together. It was quite impressive. So this was on your left. It was the first. It was our first example of when I got the lights working and I got all the things really just wired and working. And then the picture on the right is from the Blackhat knock when I was able to place it there. So well, actually, no, there's two pieces of information on here that are important, but first is the pineapple. This is why the security community is amazing, because everybody's always trying to like help and build out better. So I was at Blackhat, and this guy's like, that's amazing, but you're missing something. And I'm like, oh yeah, what's that? And he's like, you need a pineapple on top. Your cactus has to have fruit. It's got to be your prickly pear. And so he literally gets on his phone right then and gets on Amazon and orders it, overnights it to an Amazon locker on the Strip in Las Vegas, and now we have a pineapple. So that's awesome. And then now, today, we now have a badge for the Pineapple Rick. So yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, it takes a community to do this stuff. Okay, so an interesting thing happened when I first powered this thing on. So one of the things that these devices do in their default state is they beacon out a basically pre-programmed SSID and a wireless network, open wireless network. So when you plug all of these in at once, that begins to happen. It just starts broadcasting. So I'm down there working away, you know, not really thinking of something. And then all of a sudden, my kids are like, hey, Dad, we can't watch YouTube. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I got internet on my computer. It's working fine because I'm wired into this, right? I don't understand. So I pull out my phone, and this is an app called Wiggle. And I look at it, and I'm like, oh, crap. Look at all of these beacons. Look at all these wireless networks. So all of those are the pineapples because they were all default. So apparently just having them on in broadcast mode can create a DDoS effect to where it will take down YouTube and not allow my children to watch YouTube, which is not ever a good thing. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about software. When I first started working on this project, the software began to become just this huge nightmare in my head, because you've got all these devices, and in the year previous, I was doing all the aggregation by hand. And I was like, this is really tough. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this. So then I got to know the developer of Kismet. His name is Dragorn. He hooked up this whole project, basically made this entirely possible. And what is happening on the software side of things is there is a thing called the Kismet client. And the Kismet client is running on every single one of the Tetras. It's basically a dummy client that's just grabbing the things out of the air, turning it into a raw pipe, and then pushes it into the NUC. And so I have a Tetris or a Kismet server running on the NUC that then accepts all that data. So now aggregation is easy. Everything ends up in one PCAP file. Everything ends up inside of the NUC for me to do analysis, which is amazing. So a practical application of this, if you're interested, would be imagine putting these sensor nodes all throughout your infrastructure at work or your office, connecting them via your Ethernet connection, and then porting it back to a single dashboard. And so Kismet's doing some really awesome stuff. So in the past, who's heard of Kismet? A couple of you? Oh, cool. Yeah, most of you. Awesome. So Kismet traditionally was a war driving software, right? You go network stumbling, you go out, you're looking for information. Well, now it's evolved into something completely different. And I'll hopefully have time to give you a demo. And basically now it's included an intrusion detection system, wireless monitoring. It's amazing what's evolved to. So you could easily set up this type of a system, distribute your nodes, and then know what's going on around in the wireless around you. Of course, you can also use a USB cable and plug in, or a USB hub and plug in a bunch of USB devices to this as well, and it still works in that traditional sense too. But the fact that you can do monitoring over Ethernet, wireless monitoring over Ethernet is really powerful. Let's see, did I cover all the points? Everything goes, yeah, I think I did. Oh, one more point. If you can, please support Kismet on Patreon. It's an amazing project, fully open source. It's one developer right now, and then I'm kind of officially the quality engineer because I've been testing all of the software. This thing's running head on GitHub, so I don't know how many of you guys have run super, super alpha software, but it can be stressful sometimes, especially when it's all C and has to be compiled. So anyways, so support. Also, we have a Discord you can join. It's very active with a bunch of wireless enthusiasts, so if that's something you're interested in, check it out. All right, it's a cool story, bro. What does it do? So right now, we're passively listening to 50 channels at the same time. And it's completely passive, so it's not actually sending any data out. So, but what does that mean? Well, we can actually capture data that's being in the air around us. So if the data is not encrypted, then we can traverse higher layers in the 7-layer model. So typically, this looks at mostly layer 2 data, right? So that's the wireless frame information. You'll see MAC addresses, SSIDs, that type of information. But if somebody's using unencrypted, we can then travel up as if we're connected to a hub. So how many of us are still running hubs? Any hands? Any hands? Nobody, right? But technically, you can't get to them, he says. Challenge accepted, eBay. No, just kidding. Essentially, like running a wireless network is kind of like having a hub. As long as a monitoring device is within range of the communicator, it can pick up that information. Now, granted, that's why it's important to have encryption, right? But if you're monitoring information, you can download that. You could then find try to crack the key, and you can unencrypt the data that you previously captured. So that's another part that's scary. So it's very important to have very long passwords. It's very important to make sure that your encryption is using certificates that are not guessable. Let's see, did I cover all those points? Sorry, I kind of like go off of the thing and then come back and just make sure. Yeah, encryption makes traffic harder to get at, but it's not impossible. And that's another thing, too, that I want to just touch on, too. It's important to make sure you're using multiple layers of encryption, right? So there's the HTTPS Everywhere project, which is pushing encryption basically every website, and they've made it very easy to secure SSL certs. Why is that project so big? Because we can't trust lower layers. And so another thing is you want to make sure you're using a VPN, too, when you're on wireless. All right, one other thing that's really crazy that I hadn't even thought about this for a use case is troubleshooting noisy environments. So here, we already have a ton of access points set up, but then there's also wireless around us. So what happens if you have clients disconnecting and you're trying to figure out what's going on? Normally, you would have a single laptop with its one radio in it, or maybe you have the special dongle from another company that would monitor for you. But the problem is it's time shifting. It's shifting between the channels. So as it's taking time on each channel, you're missing what's happening on the other channels. So when you have this many radios, you're able to listen to that entire set at the same time, so you're less likely to miss information and miss different types of things that are happening. So it can be useful in troubleshooting too. A friend of mine, he's like, hey, yeah, you should totally bring this to New York City and put it in one of the high-rises and see what sort of stuff you get. I'm like, dude, that's genius. So hopefully I'll be able to go out there. So the last thing that it does, obviously, it's got to blink, right? So we're hackers. We like to put LEDs on everything. So LEDs. All right, so I've gotten a ton of questions, and hopefully I'll have some time for questions. But I wanted to just kind of go through some of the frequent ones. And just kind of get those handled for you, because I'm sure those are on your list. How much does it weigh? Yeah, it's pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy. Before the battery, I bet it's about 20 to 22 kilos. And then the first battery we had, that one probably made it about 25. And then this battery is putting it probably around 30, I would say. So it's kind of heavy. How much data have I gotten? Well, I've got a slide that breaks it all out. But if you've looked at the pwn board, the pwn board in the other room, I was actually pushing data to that. And when I last looked at it, I was like at 59-ish gigs here, which is crazy. You guys must love wireless. So right on. You guys are definitely doing your duty on pushing data on the wireless. Am I getting cancer? Probably, I don't know. Actually, technically, it's non-ionizing radiation, so the risk is low. Also, it's passive, so YOLO? Another one is, am I planning on having kids? Well, I have 2, so I'm good, so we're done there. Is it hot? Yeah, it's freaking hot. Especially at the top. After, if you're interested, you can come touch the metal plate on the top. Luckily, I did use aluminum, so we can draw some of that heat out. But yeah, it gets pretty warm. I had a thermal graphic of it, and basically at the top, I've seen temperatures as high as 35 to 40 degrees C. Maximum operating temperature on these are probably about 45 C. I probably wouldn't want to get higher than that. So yeah, a little bit toasty, a little bit toasty. How much does it cost? Luckily, it's a sponsored project, so I'm only into it maybe $1,000 or so, but 1,000 US. I'm not sure the conversion rate. Yeah, there you go. So, and then overall, it's the tetras are about $200 a piece, and so overall, it's about 6,000 US. So you can do that conversion again quickly in your heads. Thank you. I apologize. How much time did it make? How much time did it take to make? I started working on it in February of this year, and it took pretty much up until a week before DefCon before I had it ready. So I don't even want to think about the hundreds of hours that I've put into it. And then the battery, how long does battery last? So yesterday there was a 15 amp hour battery that lasted about an hour and a half. And we're anticipating this one lasting about 3 to 4 hours. So overall, it draws about 350 to 400 watts of power. So it's about half a toaster, so pretty reasonable. Okay, so conference war walking. I've been taking this thing to a couple different places. The first conference I took it to was Blackhat. That was Las Vegas. DefCon, obviously, that was at Las Vegas. I found out at DefCon there was a conference called CactusCon. And it's like, well, I have to take the WiFiCactus to CactusCon. Also, fun note about it is it's free to get in. So I was like, yeah, there, free, awesome, love that. And then SaintCon, it's a security conference in Utah. That's really where I got my start. They've really been just huge helpful, and so that's another security conference. If you're ever in the States, there's some cool ones to go check out. All right, so let me tell you a little bit of a story about the WiFiCactus and casinos and hotels and fun. So my first war walk, so this is a Google image of the Luxor and Mandalay Bay. On the right is the Luxor. You can kind of see the pyramid. And then basically, so my room, I tried to get a room in the Mandalay Bay, but if you've ever been to Blackhat, it's very difficult if you book late. But the Luxor is right next door. It's within walking distance. Well, walking distance. Sometimes that's not very easy. So my room happened to be on the very far side of the pyramid, and the conference center is clear on the opposite side. So I'm in my room, and I've got this thing all out, and I've got it on my back, and I look in the mirror. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't do this. I'm about to go through a casino. I'm about to go through another casino. I'm about to go through like a little mall area. Maybe I shouldn't do this. And I started thinking about, maybe I should have not used this on it to turn on and off the LEDs. So then I thought, YOLO, right? We're hackers. We got to push the limits of things. We got to see how far we can take things, right? So there's some statistics about my walk that day. I was able to, sorry I didn't convert it. I apologize. But yeah, there's a ton of steps that I ended up doing that day, and I consider them power steps, because when you have this much weight on your back, power steps, right? You get like double credit. It was a very long distance, to say the least. So, and this was the first time I had taken it anywhere. So I'm walking and walking and walking. I get to well, first of all, I get to security at Blackhat. And they're kind of a little bit crazy about security. They want to make sure that you've got your badge. You know, it's a pretty expensive conference to go to. They want to make sure you have your badge and that you're supposed to be there, right? So I got this thing on my back. Security's like, oh my gosh, that's rad. And I'm like, yeah, right on. And I just go riding up the escalator. No badge, no nothing. So then I go to the knock. I'm like, hello, knock. There's a front door. They actually have hotel security that is stationed in front of the Blackhat knock, because obviously there's a lot of infrastructure in a knock. And the security guard's like, oh, do you need me to get that door for you? And I'm like, why, yes, thank you. Opens it up. I walk right in. And that picture on that's kind of cut off. But basically the picture on your left is me, my first entry into the knock. And people were like, what is this? How did you get here? What's going on? This is insane. And then there's some other pictures there too. Like PC Mag, the one in the middle, that was from PC Mag, crazy awesome magazine. They had me in their picture, which is insane. And then also on Twitter, it was going nuts. And then on the left here is Grifter again. He's a friend of mine. He actually runs the knock. He's taking a picture there. And then on the right, I don't know if you can see it very well, but if you look at the people's faces, it's like interested, interested, interested. And then there's one person that's like, whatever, this is not interesting. It's all good, but I got most of them. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little anecdote about the Luxor. So when you're doing a project like this, you got to have a lot of support material. And yeah, that's the cart that I use to take all of my equipment into the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas. And the picture on the right there is all of my gear strewn about the room. So I don't know if you guys have heard about the shooting that happened in Las Vegas. People have been asking, like, how do people get gear into the room, or how did that guy get so many guns in there? And it's like, well, I know how. Like, it's not hard. You put it on a cart and you push it in. Hopefully they don't change any rules, because I'm going to be doing this again with the cart and all the things again. So basically what happened is, I'm over at Blackhat with this on. Thank goodness I had this on. And I take this off and I leave it in the knock. I go back to my room, put in the key, and it lights up 2 orange lights. It's never a good sign when you get 2 blinking orange lights. It's like bleep, bleep. I'm like, oh, crap. I try it again. I'm like, oh, well, maybe my card got messed up in my wallet. How many times has that happened? Never. So I go down to the front desk, and I'm like, my card's not working. the guy's like, at the front desk is like, yeah, here, give me your name and information. Looks it up. All right, just a moment. I'm like, okay. Comes back, and I'm like, okay, this is taking a really long time for just needing to get a new card. All of a sudden, behind me and to the left, they're like, Mr. Spicer? I'm like, yes. Yeah, we need you to come with us. I'm like, oh, crap. He's like, yeah, we had guest services look through your room, and they're kind of concerned about some of the things. You need to tell us what's going on in your room. Right at that moment, I'm like, I am so thankful that this is in the Blackhat NOC and not in my room. Because everything that's in there is pretty manageable. Like, I'm not too nervous about that. So I start talking to the guy, and he's like, what is this? I'm like, wireless monitoring project. And so I gave him the whole spill and told him about it, and I was like, I'm collecting data, and I'm doing this. And he's like, okay, well, that seems cool. Well, mostly I'm just interested because you had an Xbox controller. Do you play video games? I'm like, yeah, I play video games. He's like, awesome, me too. What's your favorite game? And next thing I know, we're talking about games. And this is the chief investigator at the Luxor, too, by the way. Like, so anyway, so be very friendly if you get stopped by security and talk about video games, because it will probably work. Pro tip. We get up to my room, he's looking through all my stuff. He actually calls another security guard, and he wanted to know what's going on. So the reason why they're kind of like concerned is apparently people go to the Luxor because it overlooks McCarran Airport. And people will bring crazy antennas, and they'll try to start jamming stuff at the airport, and they'll start listening to stuff at the airport because there's all sorts of fun flights that fly in there because of the closeness to Area 51. So it's a huge hobby. I had no idea. So yeah, he's like, does this stuff do anything with airplanes and FAA? I'm like, nope, totally Wi-Fi. He's like, all right, you're good. Fist bumped, and we're out. So it was cool. It ended up being a really neat experience. So then, real quick, right before he left the room, I'm like, hey, I got to tell you something. He's like, what's that? I'm like, I kind of got a thing over at the Mandalay Bay. And he's like, oh, yeah, what's that? I'm like, it stands about this tall. It's got a bunch of antennas. And he's like, oh, yeah? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, please don't let your please tell your security guards to be nice to me as I come back through the casino and not tackle me with this thing on. Because I had to get back to my room at some point. So luckily, I was able to have a good introduction with them, and didn't have any issues with security from that point forward. But the looks I got going through a casino with this, casinos have quite a bit of security. It's kind of crazy. So, all right. So sometimes you get crazy ideas. So, how many of you have been to Blackhat? Anyone? No, very few. Okay. So, Blackhat is a lot of money, and a lot of people pay a lot of money to set up vendor booths there. And the vendor booths are huge and just ginormous, and they pay people to speak at it. And it's what you expect from a very large convention. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to take the cactus down there and see what happens. So we walk in, and people are starting to just swarm us. So then my friend's like, hey, let's just put this little barrier around you and just lock you in, and let's see if we can just have people come take questions. And so I'm like, all right. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a guy actually in the picture of me with the little barrier around me in the background who's actually really unhappy because I'm actually getting more traffic than he is to his booth. And I'm not even supposed to be here. I don't have a badge. All I have is this thing on, and I didn't pay. I didn't set up a booth, nothing. So I guess be creative when you set up your booths. Instead of spending lots of money, you can get way more traction. Oh, yeah, one other note. My friend Kevin, he's like, I was just randomly talking, and one of the things I said was, I'm just a subtle reminder to put your phone in airplane mode. And that kind of blew up on the internet, and we got a lot of retweets on that. And so, yeah, so be in airplane mode. All right, so this is DefCon. I took this thing over there, and it was insane, the reception that I got there. Basically, everywhere I walked, it took a very long time to get there because I love talking to people, and I love to interact with people, and there was just crowds around me all the time. And what was awesome is the DefCon staff would actually be helpful and be like, hey, we need to move you over to here, and you're creating a bottleneck, and let's help move you, and you can continue talking and doing your stuff. And it was really neat. It was really cool to see that my project, this thing that I built, had that level of interest. And I was like, what? This is crazy. Like, thank you. Like, I couldn't believe how much support and how much people like this project. So that's awesome. And you guys here, thank you. Like, again, it happened here. I was over in the other room and the crowd, and it was awesome. So thank you, because this really inspires me and like gives me motivation to do bigger and better projects. Also at DefCon, I just wanted to shout out that I did a demo lab there too. And so it was the first year that I got a speaker badge at DefCon. So that was pretty awesome. I've always loved DefCon. I've been going for a very long time. Like I said before, I'd gone to CactusCon. And what was crazy is because I just showed up, they're like, hey, do you want a table in the vendor area? And do you want to just like start doing demos with your cactus? I'm like, okay. So completely unplanned, I get a table and I get like just people and start talking about the project. And I was probably getting more traction than, because PayPal's based there, and they were one of the major vendors, and I was probably getting more traction to the booths than they were. So, which was crazy, which is awesome. So again, thank you. And at SaintCon, SaintCon was the first time I'm like, oh, dude, I got to hook up a laptop and be able to be looking at stuff in real time. So I have this cool thing called a Connect-A-Desk. Just walk around with that. I had it here as well. Those things are a lifesaver if you need to be computing, mobile, laptoping on the go. Okay, so let's talk about the datas. How are we doing on time? All right, we're still pretty good. The datas. So I don't know if you guys have ever played with a fire hose before, but this is what I feel like when I'm playing with the data, because this thing is just grabbing everything, and it's so much data, so much, and it's kind of hard to deal with. So let's talk about how much that is, and let's compare it to years past. So the data that's listed here is specifically for DefCon and Blackhat. So in 2015, I captured 280 megs with that little device I put in my backpack. And then the year after, with my 12 boxes, I caught 42 gigs. In 2017, at DefCon and Blackhat, I caught 138 gigs with this. More radios makes a difference. MAC addresses were crazy. And the unique SSIDs. It's always fun to see unique SSIDs, right? All right, so what else? So here's the breakout. I even added, this is a little bit old information from here, but we'll still go over the numbers. 65 gigs at the Blackhat knock, 4 gigs in the vendor area of me just standing there with it, 3 gigs from my war walk, that one that I did from the Luxor all the way over. When I war walked at DefCon, which I calculated to be about 7 hours worth of time, and that was 18 gigs. During my demo, what was crazy during my demo is there was some bugs in the software, because like I said, I'm running the bleeding edge of this software, Kismet. There was a bug where if it saw more than about 15,000 devices at the same time, it would actually crash the server. And so during my demo, I was having multiple times where I was crashing my crashing Kismet, which was crazy. So I probably could have caught more data. SaintCon, another place where they clearly love the Wi-Fi's, 87 gigs in 12 hours. And then here, in 9 hours, caught 42 gigs. So you guys in SaintCon, you're kind of on pace with each other to see who gets more. So be interesting to see that. And to give you an idea, on the right is kind of an idea of the amount of data and how it looks. So basically the way that Kismet's set up is it writes to a file I have it programmed every 60 seconds. So this is what you can expect in your PCAP files. And I don't know how many of you guys have worked with PCAP files bigger than 100 megs, but it basically makes you want to bash your head into a table. It's impossible to do any sort of analysis with. So I typically, to do analysis like for this data, I script T-Shark with bash or have a Python wrapper around it to pull the data out I need. Because I'm not a C programmer or low level, I don't do stuff in libpcap. I'm not that cool yet. But one day, I'm getting close. I'm like this close to just writing my own PCAP stuff. All right, so to give you kind of a summary of some of the MAC addresses that I saw at DefCon, there was 104,000 unique MAC addresses, which is just crazy number of MAC addresses. So what I'm wondering is if multiple devices are like renewing their MAC address or randomizing. So, because that's a new trend we're starting to see, is randomization in the MAC addresses. So I wonder if that explains some of the large amount that we're seeing here. And then at DefCon, some of the noisy access points, Caesars has, DefCon was held at Caesars, I failed to mention that, Caesars Palace. They have some noisy equipment. This is the hotel. They really want people to connect to their wireless. So it'll be interesting to see how the rate at which devices beacon compare to here in different locations, because maybe you can get an insight into how administrators are configuring their networks, how quickly they're beaconed. Also, from an attacker perspective, that's interesting to know, because now I can also send out an equal amount of beacons that speed or slightly less, and it doesn't look as obvious because I'm not as nearly as noisy as they are. Oh yeah, then another fun one was the Pirate Box. How many of you guys have heard of Pirate Box? Anybody? Pirate Box is a Raspberry Pi distribution. You put it on, it sets up an open access point, and then it has file sharing built in, so you can just throw files on. It has like a chat server and stuff, so it's just a pirate box. You just put stuff on it, set it up, and it's good for file transfer. So yeah, one of those was kind of noisy, or multiple of those were kind of noisy at DefCon. All right, so what frequencies am I covering? The whole thing. Actually, it depends on country jurisdiction. So, and I'm not exactly sure where you guys fit in on the scale, but this is the 40 channels that are legal to broadcast on in the United States according to the FCC in Part 15 of the FCC guidelines. Now, I've been running around here talking about 81 channels. What this table fails to include is the 40 megahertz and 80 megahertz channel widths as well. And so those overlap on top of these same center widths. They're just wider channels. All right, so let's talk about some of the alerts at DefCon that I saw. So here, the biggest one, which is no surprise at a hacker conference, in my opinion, is broadcast disconnect, which is a form of deauthentication or disconnect. Basically, you're trying to convince wireless devices to get off the network and reconnect to something. So if I was an attacker, I would be using this method to get your laptop to disconnect maybe from its secure wireless and convince it to connect to my man-in-the-middle wireless that I've just set up. And so that was the biggest one that I saw. And the other reason why it's big is because it's a very noisy attack. It happens a lot in order to convince someone to have their equipment disconnect. Some devices just don't do it. Some of the other ones listed on here is like timestamps. There's been a huge increase in the number of wireless providers that synchronize their timestamps. And so if your timestamp doesn't match correctly, a fake AP gets set up, and if it doesn't have the right timestamp, then it's obviously a fake. And so that's one way to do detection on that. Some more interesting events that happened is we were seeing SSIDs that were getting encryption dropped. So basically, that's somebody spoofing a wireless network. And then also, while I was at Blackhat, BroadPwned was dropped. So BroadPwned is a vulnerability that they, it's a kernel-level vulnerability on Broadcom chipsets. So I was monitoring, not with this, but with the mini cacti, and so I was able to look and see exactly how the attack worked because the guy did a live demo. And as you can see from there, it's again, another noisy attack. So that seems to be a commonality, and so that's why it's important to have devices to be able to do monitoring, because you can see who's doing these types of attacks. Here again, here's after the device is owned. Basically what his proof of concept was, he was able to get somebody connect to an access point. It then rewrites information inside of the wireless kernel to change the SSID that it should connect to. And so it changed from BroadPwned to I am owned. So yeah, go check into BroadPwned if you're interested. It's an interesting vulnerability. So there was another one that's recent called Cracks Attack. Luckily, this system with Kismet has detection for it. So with the Cracks attack, basically it's a key reinstallation. So essentially you're trying to get the client or the access point to use a different security certificate, encryption certificate. So the bad news about it is all devices were vulnerable because there's a protocol level vulnerability. And then here's the thing too, Android devices would drop to a null certificate, so they would drop to all zeros when it would happen. And so then you would know the encryption key and be able to decrypt that traffic. AP and clients were both vulnerable. The good news, everyone patched super quick, and it's also a very noisy attack. Again, we have detection for this on Kismet, and so it's something that should be easily identifiable. So, but the worst part of it is that many Android devices don't get patched, right? Who's running the latest version of Android? One guy, yeah, you're the man. Good work. So yeah, so it's important to make sure you apply patches or just pay attention to what your Wi-Fi is doing. Then there was this new vulnerability called Please Stop Naming Vulnerabilities Vulnerability, and which is an awesome name. So this one only affected Pixels and Pixel Gen 2. And it was a driver issue. So this bug, again, we have detection. I've been looking for it here, and I haven't been seeing it attacked in the wild. It's kind of a more niche bug because it's going directly after the Google Pixel. And it's already patched. And if you have a Pixel, odds are you're already running the latest Android anyways, so you're good to go. All right, how am I on time? Am I out? Am I good? You're good. I'm good? They say I'm good. So we'll do a quick live demo. I wanted to show you Kismet, and then I'll go over some of the other things. So here's Kismet. So traditionally, Kismet was in a command line. You guys have used it. You guys know. It was in a command line. It was a box, and you ran it in a console, and it was awesome, and it worked, and it did stuff. Well, now it's grown up, and the way it's grown up is it's now a web server, because all good things need to be on the web, right? Everything on the web. All right, so with this, basically what we're able to do here is we can look in real time inside of the data sets that I've been capturing and do some analysis on it in real time. So one of the things I always like to do is check to see if there's any Wi-Fi pineapples in range. Wow, there isn't any Wi-Fi pineapples. So basically their default MAC address is 001337. So their lead, of course, and it's registered. They actually purchased that, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so we can look for other things in here too. So this searches basically all of these fields. It helps, very dynamic. If we knew of like a MAC address of an attacker, we could put that in here and we could look for them quickly. Then also we have device lists. We can look at, like I'm looking at a specific device right now. We've seen this device on these channels. And then we can also see what types of, the amount of data that it's pushed. So for example, the majority of this device is pushed data packets. So the other type of packet here is LLC or management frames. So these are like association or disconnecting or working with the lower level connection part of it. But this device obviously has done a lot more. So whoever's MAC address this is, I don't know whose it is, but hopefully it's not any of yours. Yeah, so we caught some of your data, about 6.17K. The other cool thing here as well is we can see over time if they're communicating. So I apologize. Let me see if I can scoot that over. There you go. So yeah, so we can see if they're communicating in real time. So let me show you what that looks like. Let me find somebody who's active. Here we go. So basically, we can just see, oh, this one isn't communicating. This one has just had a large amount of data. But it's nice to have just a quick little graph to see what's going on. In addition, we can see what radios inside of this setup have seen that device. So if it's a device that's hopping on multiple channels, we'll be able to pick that up. And then one other fun thing inside of here that I always like to do is show the channel coverage. Oh, this graph is messed up. Sorry about that resolution. But basically, it just shows the 50 devices and complete coverage of the spectrum. We can also look, too, real quick down here and see which channels are the noisiest, so we can see who's pushing data on certain channels, so this can be used for troubleshooting, debugging, things like that. So also, in the back end of this, it's writing it to a PCAP file, so all of this information can be analyzed offline later as well. So yeah, that's Kismet. Check it out. I would encourage you to check it out. It's a super awesome project, and it's free Free as in beer. Okay, so let's talk about some of the press, because this has been crazy. This is somebody's post on a Medium blog, like Artistic got me from the back. I didn't even know he was there, and put it online. Then I found it from a Google search for hashtag WiFiCactus. So kind of crazy to find pictures of yourself on the internet, but I guess when you do something like this, that's what happens. Then this one was like the biggest one in my mind. Adafruit picked it up. And I'm in contestant for this thing called Wearables of the Year. So this might win Wearables of the Year. So if you know anyone at Adafruit, tell them to go ahead and make that a thing. And also, I was featured in their Wearables Wednesday. So I'm glad they think it's wearable. So right on. And then have that article retweeted by Arduino, that's awesome. I mean, I've been using Arduino stuff since their inception. I think they're a great organization. And then PC Magazine, which I already talked about, they had a picture of my stuff in their article. Like, this is from their website. Like, I took this directly. Like, this is a screen dump from that. Like, crazy, mind-blowing. Like, hey, that's my cactus. And then there was an article. I didn't even know about this article. A friend linked it to me, and it was a CNET article. And the author wrote this. In one corner, and this is about, he wrote his entire article about the Blackhat knock and how they have it set up and what they're doing there. And this is what he wrote, and I love this. He says, in one corner is a goofy but terrifying device called a WiFiCactus that looks like a growing tree with spiky antennas coming out of it. Theoretically, it can scan for thousands of connections, but these hackers are mostly using it as an amusing prop. You know it, amusing prop. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. It's crazy. And then this was another crazy one. So I actually met the author of that CNET article, and he wanted to do an interview with me. And so part of this is put in another article with greats like Gary Kasparov and David Brumley, and it's talking about smart cities and AI and WiFiCactus. So I was like, thank you, CNET, right on. Good mention. So that was really cool. Whoa, what did I just do? I just pushed the end button. Got to push the end button from time to time. Okay, so then a couple other things happened. I got a couple other interviews. There's this headline, this guy hunts Wi-Fi hackers using a giant backpack made out of radios. Thought that was pretty cool. Then there were some pretty funny tweets on here. Guy with giant wireless router backpack or something. And this guy puts that GIF. I thought that was pretty funny. And then the funny one was like, why? Why though? So then had a couple other ones. The guy on the right in the photo there is Mike. He's from a magazine or a website called Hackaday, which is another amazing thing. Like, it was awesome to be able to meet him. And so that's why it's important to go to conferences and get out and see people, because you get to meet just amazing people. And now I'm going to talk about kind of some of the wins. It actually works. And I got it here. I mean, we had a little issue with some LEDs here, but luckily somebody had a soldering station, so huge thanks out to them. Yeah, so it works. It actually does stuff. And I got it here, and I haven't been detained yet, and it came and it made it, so yes. And I've got tons of data. I've probably got enough data to do analysis for the next long while. And the response has been just amazing and humbling. I've been really just humbled by what people think of my project. Like, in my mind, I'm like, this is the nerdy thing I made in my basement with my friends. And instead, it's like, you guys are like, this is cool. And I'm like, yeah, I love it. So I love that people are passionate about this stuff. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to talk about some of the fails. Crashes originally caused the tetras to... crashes would cause the tetras to kick on an access point. So I'm like, hey, it's a passive. And some guy holds up a phone and is like, yeah, no, you're not passive. You're broadcasting. I'm like, oh, crap. But luckily, I fixed that bug. It's been super heavy. You know, it's got a lead-acid battery. And it doesn't have a car adapter, so I can't plug it in to the car and war drive with it. So that was a huge oversight. I got to use battery when we're war driving with it. And then, I don't know how many of you have seen the headlines about DefCon, but the biggest headline was voting machines. And if I would have strapped a voting machine to this thing would have gone to the stratosphere, I'm sure. So next year, look for this with a voting machine on top of it. So what's next? Obviously, I want more analysis. I want it more automated. I want to be able to do all of that and consume much larger amounts of data. And then I want to add more radios, more different types of radios. I want to be monitoring Bluetooth. I want to look at 4G. I want to look at all the things, look at lots of different spectra than just Wi-Fi. Talking about maybe adding a Segway to this thing so that way it can follow you around and so I don't have to pack it. I want to add LiPos, lots of LiPos. We want to give this thing tons of battery time. Real-time statistics is actually something that we got here. I was able to upload to the Pwn board and get some data published there. So that's like huge thanks to Anatol and Alex. It was awesome to be able to get that working, and that's a huge win. And so that's just something that I want to do in the future is be able to provide some sort of real-time visualization into it. Visual data visualization, too, I think is very important so people can understand what's going on inside of this device. And then tactile necks, if you're Archer fans, so maybe we'll have some of those. And then that's the WiFiCactus. So I thank you so much for your time. Thank you.